So everyone, thank you for coming to RareDay. I know that everybody stays up super late at night, so I understand that it took some extra commitment for you to get here. I'm sure you all were having a lot of fun. So thanks for being here in the morning. Our first speaker for today, and who's also helping sponsor this event, is Monad. So if you haven't heard of Monad, it's a high-performance L1, which is EVM-compatible. They also have really immaculate vibes on Twitter. I'll ask him about that later. But no, this is an engineering day, and the engineering that they put into it has really impressed me, and I'm hard to impress, I think. So definitely asked the team to come here and speak and share some really interesting details about their technical architecture. So Keone is one of the co-founders of Monad, and he'll be giving the talk, and then we'll have a quick Q&A afterwards. So without further ado.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Jeffrey and team. Great to be here.
Thank you.
Should we stand? I'm sorry?
Oh, no. I didn't know if you wanted to say anything. Didn't want to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
To say something about Monad. Got it. Yeah, I mean, it's really great to be here in front of a really talented group of developers. I've always been a big fan of Rare Skills, and Jeffrey, what you and your team have put together in terms of scalable resources, the books are amazing, the boot camps. I just think it's really important to build scalable resources that help everyone upskill, and we all can get better. There are always new things that we can learn. So it's great to be here. Monad is a technology project that is introducing new architecture to Ethereum and the EVM. There are sort of four major improvements that I'll talk about really briefly, but the really high-level TLDR for users and developers is pure compatibility with Ethereum, full bytecode compatibility, so you could take literally the same bytecode that's deployed on Ethereum and redeploy on Monad without any changes. And then under the hood, our team has introduced a bunch of architectural improvements that enable the system to process things much more efficiently. I think people probably have heard of Monad mostly for parallel execution initially. And that's,
let's do an audience check. Who here has heard of Monad?
That's a good check.
Okay, most of you. Okay, I guess let's make this slightly more technical. Who is aware that Monad does parallel execution? Okay, half of them. Who here has heard of MonadDB? Okay, who here has heard of the what was the consensus algorithm called again? MonadBFT. Okay, that's our audience.
Cool. Well, that makes sense also, because honestly, a lot of the technical details of any blockchain should really be abstracted away. At the end of the day, the goal is to provide a universal interface, or to conform to a universal interface in the form of the EVM bytecode and in the form of the Ethereum JSON RPC. But we can talk a little bit about some of those things just to give a sense of how performance is unlocked, because I think that is helpful context in terms of how people would be building things.
Yeah, please do.
Sure. I think the first thing to know is that although parallel execution is the thing that I think steals everyone's hearts, because it's just so obvious that you would want a system that uses multiple threads, that uses multiple processors, and that is part of it. But at the end of the day, the actual biggest bottleneck for execution is state access. And this is because state lives on an SSD typically. The latency to make one SSD query, just not even talking about, just like if you had a normal any system, is somewhere between 40 and 100 microseconds. A microsecond is a millionth of a second. So that sounds pretty fast, but when you're trying to get to thousands of transactions per second, and you consider that a single transaction probably has a bunch of S loads and a bunch of S stores, and each one of those S loads and S stores is making a read to the database, and then you compound that with the fact that it's actually not just one lookup to the database typically for an S load or an S store. It's actually a large number of them, which I'll get into in a second. Then you can kind of imagine that those 40 to 100 microsecond lookups really add up very quickly. So MonadDB is, first of all, a completely new database from scratch. The thing that they always tell you in CS is like, don't build your own database. Don't do it. You're tempted to, don't do it. And that's totally fair. But in this particular case, it's actually, I think, warranted, just given the very specialized need for storing Ethereum Merkle tree data very efficiently. And given the scale of what, some of these systems, like the amount of economic value that is on Ethereum or the amount of transactions that we're trying to process with the world computer. So the Monad team built our own database from scratch. It stores Ethereum Merkle tree natively on disk, whereas existing systems in the past have embedded the database inside of another database, typically LevelDB or PebbleDB, which are more generic key value stores. And by storing the data natively on disk, there's a couple of improvements here. The first is that it eliminates a ton of indirection that would happen in the situation where the Merkle tree is stored inside of another database. And the way to think about this is that LevelDB, PebbleDB, et cetera, they all have underlying tree structures under the hood. So when you're navigating down to a node in the Merkle tree, every node that you visit actually is triggering a bunch of other lookups in this other tree. And so just to navigate to look up one value, it's actually incurring quite a large number of reads. I think it's on the order of 40 or 50 per lookup using LevelDB. So with MonadDB, it's much more direct. It's just directly navigating to the specific piece of data on SSD, and that's one of the improvements that ultimately makes MonadDB a lot more efficient. Other things are supporting asynchronous I/O, bypassing the file system. So just there's a lot of different improvements that make this really efficient.
Oh, I'm curious. This was hit you with some technical questions that I'm curious about. For other EVM-compatible chains that are using Merkle trees, how easily would they be able to drop in MonadDB?
We think that this is a very modular component. I think it will be pretty easy for other systems to ultimately use this. It's intended to be a drop-in replacement.
Wow, that's really cool. Yeah, one thing I like about the Monad team is their some blockchain strategy is to be very antagonistic towards other people and not share tech or keep it mostly to yourselves. But they've really thought about how can other people benefit from all the research that we're doing that will help the EVM compatibility. I'm not just saying that because they sponsored our event. Like that's something that really impressed me. So I think that's really cool. Are there any other things that R&D that you guys are doing that other people will be able to use? Do you think?
Yeah, I think so. The next one I wanted to mention is optimistic parallel execution. So just to describe it for a second, optimistic is totally unrelated to the optimism or the optimistic of optimistic rollups. Optimistic in this case just means executing a bunch of transactions in parallel, assuming that they're starting from the same starting point, producing a bunch of pending results and committing those pending results in the original order of the transactions, doing some bookkeeping, so keeping track of inputs and outputs to make sure that every single pending result still has the correct inputs and re-executing if needed. It's actually a very simple algorithm. It has a lot of fancy names, but at the end of the day, it's just the simple idea of executing many transactions, generating a bunch of I guess you could say like memoized or like temporary results that are keeping track of literally every single storage slot that's been accessed, every single storage slot that's been read in, and every single storage slot that's been mutated in the course of that transaction. So writing those down and then committing those pending results in the original order. At the end of the day, this allows for much greater execution efficiency. And the other thing is it interacts really well with MonadDB, because if you think about the way that transactions work, basically every single transaction when being run, sort of surfaces a bunch of dependencies in the form of S loads and S stores. And if you can execute a bunch of these transactions in parallel, then you start surfacing a lot of these dependencies in parallel. So then MonadDB can go and fetch the appropriate data, maximally utilizing the actual throughput of the disk.
I see. Another thing about the hardware requirements of running a Monad node, what I recall, they were like 16 gigabytes of RAM, 100 MBS internet or something like that. How did you, which are pretty reasonable because that's a pretty normal computer. I'm curious, why couldn't you just say, it's not hard for a computer nerd to upgrade their RAM from 16 to 32 GBs, and most motherboards support that. So how did you, it seems like you were fairly conservative in the specs that you were going for on the PC, but I imagine someone running a node probably enjoys souping up their computer. So how did you arrive at the specs that you guys decided to constrain yourselves under?
Yeah, just to make one slight correction there, it's 32 gigs of RAM is the.
Why not 64 then?
I know, yeah.
Or 100? Mine has 128, and I don't need all of it.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think any system is basically designed with a specific minimum target spec, and then the job of the system designer should be to get the most possible performance out of that spec. We chose 32 gigs of RAM, 100 gigs of bandwidth, a 2 terabyte SSD, and just a pretty typical CPU as the spec, because we felt that that would allow anyone who wants to be able to run a node economically. So this is a spec that you can get. Like, this is a Costco MacBook. This is not anything crazy, and we think it's really important from a perspective of decentralization that, number one, it should be cheap to run a node, so that anyone can potentially participate as a full validator that's has accumulated stake and participating in block production. And also anyone should be able to run a node and have access to all of the shared global state, at the cost of, a couple $100 per year.
So what? Oh, you mentioned, can you run this on operating systems, or do you need to use Linux, or how would that work?
Linux right now. Yeah, in the longer term, we will be working on supporting Windows and so on, but that it's just further out. It's not really the priority.
For sure. This is kind of a left field question, but do you ever plan on incorporating like a ZK verification at some point in the future? I mean, I know that's very far out on the roadmap, but obviously I'm very deep in the ZK thing, so I'm more of a personal question, I guess.
Yeah, we're very interested in it. I think so. Another thing to mention is that I told you about 2 of the 4 improvements, MonadDB and optimistic parallel execution. The third improvement that I wanted to mention is asynchronous execution, which is the idea of completely separating consensus from execution, moving execution into a separate swim lane that is slightly lagged relative to consensus, so that nodes, when they come to consensus, they're only coming to consensus on the official ordering of the transactions.
Yeah, you guys even used 2 different languages for that, right? One was Rust and one was C++ or something?
Exactly, yeah. The consensus component of the client is built in Rust. The execution system is built in C++. But yeah, these are decoupled, and the way to understand why this is the case, and by the way, this will come back to your ZK question in a second.
I can wait till the end, don't worry.
Oh, no, it's actually very relevant, but I feel like I need to give some background information first.
For sure.
So yeah, the way to think about it is that in most systems where consensus and execution are coupled with each other, where they're interleaved, the budget for execution is actually a very small fraction of the block time. And you can see this very clearly in Ethereum, for example, because Ethereum has 12-second block times, but the budget for execution is about 100 milliseconds, which is 1% of that 12 seconds. And so it's like literally you have a big block time, and then 1% of that is allocated to execution. And the reason for that is that the remainder of the time has to be allocated for consensus. Consensus is expensive because nodes are all the way, on different sides of the world needing to communicate with each other. And execution has to also happen kind of multiple times in that story of producing one block, because the leader executes messages to everyone else receives that message and has to execute, then has to vote. So execution is very, very squeezed into a small fraction of time of the block time in an interleaved system. And in asynchronous execution, we basically move execution out of that hot path of consensus into a separate swim lane that's slightly lagging. And the result is that the entire block time can be used as opposed to only a small fraction. So as a result, because the budget is increased, basically, Monad can have bigger blocks with many more transactions in them, and still have the execution system be able to keep up. So, that's just to mention a little bit about one of these design aspects of Monad. Now back to ZK, I think the very long term is we're very interested in moving so right now it's the same node is doing both of those jobs. That node is talking to a bunch of other nodes, voting, the consensus mechanism. But then that same node is also executing all of those transactions. And in theory, we could decouple these further into completely separate jobs, having some separate execution system that just executes and then generates a ZK proof of the result and hands it off to one of the consensus nodes. So that would be the longer term thing, but that's about all we know right now. So if there people who know a ton about ZK and want to work on this, then we'd love to talk.
You want to talk about the fourth speed up that you're doing?
Sure. The fourth is so everything I've described up to this point is about raising the budget for execution. So getting more time to execute within the block time, and then also making the execution itself more efficient through optimistic parallel execution and through the faster database. But if we have this fast system on the execution side, we also need a fast consensus mechanism to keep up with it. And so in particular, from our benchmarking and the system that has been built on the execution side, we know that we can execute at least 10,000 TPS of throughput running over recent Ethereum blocks. We need a consensus mechanism that can keep up with that as well. And so that, over a lot of time has evolved into what we call MonadBFT. It's a derivative of hot stuff and a derivative of DMBFT, which was originally built within Facebook, now Meta. So it's a two-phase consensus mechanism. It is linear in communication. So a lot of people might be familiar with Tendermint. Tendermint is quadratic in communication, meaning that every node messages to every other node. And the bad thing about the nice thing about quadratic communication is it's simple, but the bad part is that it doesn't really scale to a large network. So you're really constrained on the number of nodes that can participate in consensus in Tendermint in this quadratic paradigm because the messaging complexity is quadratic with the number of nodes in the network. With MonadBFT, and similarly with hot stuff, this is a linear communication protocol where the leader produces a block proposal, messages it to everyone else directly. Everyone else receives that proposal, evaluates whether it's valid, and then sends their votes to the next leader, who aggregates all those votes into a certificate using BLS multi-signatures. So aggregates all these votes into this thing that proves that everyone has voted, or that a supermajority has voted yes on that previous proposal. And then that next leader messages that certificate out along with the next block. And so overall, this is it's a very efficient mechanism that can keep up with the execution and can message. I think it's roughly 4 megabyte blocks right now every second. Can take advantage of that bandwidth. And then there's also a lot of other sub-optimizations within this protocol that allow the system to stay within that 100 megabit bandwidth constraint.
Something I'm curious about is the one issue with the EVM in its current form is the only real support they have for account abstraction is the 4337 ERC. Whereas other blockchains have account abstraction that's built in more seamlessly, like ZK Sync, for example. And then I've seen stuff like with Definity Internet Computer, where the blockchain itself can do a threshold signature, so the network itself can attest to its current state, and then other people can use that as a bridge or something. What are your thoughts about deviating from the maybe creating a superset of the EVM spec to support that, or do you see that as something that could be a liability later? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a great idea. At the present moment, our team is really focused on the absolute minimum set of things to support really high performance EVM with full compatibility. But after the mainnet, we'll have more time to evaluate different AA proposals, different ways of simplifying UX, and that's definitely very top of the list.
I see. Got it. Awesome. There's a lot of security researchers in this room. Do you plan on doing like a public contest at launch, or what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, we're planning on that.
Okay. So what can they do to prepare for participating in that?
I think studying the DMBFT consensus mechanism, the paper is really interesting. It's called Jolteon.
Wait, can you say that again? Sorry?
Jolteon.
How do you spell that?
It's like the Pokemon, Jolteon.
Okay.
Like the evolutionary derivative of Eevee, electric Pokemon.
Cool.
Yeah, so that would be one thing. And then, the consensus client is built in Rust, and execution client is built in C++. So, those are for folks that are really interested in C++ and Rust. This is a thing.
Has there ever been a C++ contest before? I don't think so. That would be. There's been quite a few Rust ones, but C++ is a first. All right. Is there anything else you want to talk about the technology before I get into the other more general questions?
No, let's go to your questions and then maybe.
Well, does the audience have any before I go? No. Okay. Let's kick it off then. Yes. Oh, go for it.
So I wanted to ask you, what are you most excited about in relation to Monad, and then maybe just in general, like in the space right now?
Well, I'm excited with Monad. We basically haven't seen a really performant EVM yet. I think that there's been a lot of growth in Solana over the past year or so, and that's more people getting familiar with the benefits of having a really cheap environment where transactions are fractions of a cent, and the system is processing 1,000+ transactions per second. So I'm really excited to see what happens when as a developer community, we have an environment with similar or higher throughput with full EVM compatibility. And just excited to see what a lot of talented developers can build taking advantage of that environment. So that's just for Monad in particular. But then more generally, I'm personally excited about, I guess you call them web proofs. So the zk-TLS, like generating attestations of off-chain data. For example, having an attestation of your status on a frequent flyer mile program, or on Robinhood, or on just any kind of application, which I think will actually allow a lot of vampire attacks of where Web3 new applications are able to vampire attack legacy Web2 applications.
Gotcha. Well, let me ask a follow-up question on that regard. What applications are you hoping to see built on Monad?
I'm first of all excited about high-fidelity DeFi. I think that right now the DeFi space has a lot of inefficiency, a lot of value that's leaked to arbitrageurs, coming from the fact that smart AMMs are not really feasible on Ethereum mainnet right now due to high costs. Oracle updates are very infrequent right now on Ethereum mainnet. I think the Chainlink updates, like every time that ETH USDC moves 0.5% or every hour, which is crazy because that basically means that any protocol that's using that Oracle downstream is a sitting duck to a lot of arbitrageurs, which then lowers the value for LPs, which then lowers the amount of liquidity that's available in the system. Then we see really high slippage that people experience when trading on Ethereum mainnet, for example. The situation is definitely a little bit better in L2s, but the slippage is still quite surprising relative to TradFi. So I'm excited about seeing basically Web3 DeFi have a comparable experience to CeFi, and especially bridging the gap not only to like the typical slippage you'd see on Binance, but actually the typical slippage you'd see on Chicago Mercantile Exchange or NASDAQ in TradFi. So excited about that as one vertical. Another is consumer apps. I think that up until now, it's been not really feasible to have an app that has 1 million daily active users. If you just do the math, like 1 million DAUs times 20 transactions per user per day would be 20 million transactions per day, but that's 200 TPS. And very few environments can support 200 TPS right now, just for that one app. I think that consumer, basically things that can cross the chasm to mass adoption will ultimately require a lot more throughput. And we need to first solve this problem of the underlying system and then enable new builders.
Cool. Well, I guess on that, so a lot of DeFi. Oh, you have a question?
Yeah, it's more regarding MonadDB. So with stellar push towards archiving part of the state, do you treat less frequently used storage areas differently than the more common ones?
That's a great question. In the present implementation, no, but we have been doing some research. Our team has been doing some research into creating different levels of storage, like a warm or hot storage and a cold storage, which I think will be more needed as the overall state grows. And there are tricks that you can do to avoid having to query the cold storage using things like Bloom filters to keep track of like which accounts actually do exist in cold storage. So it's an active area of research right now.
Wow, that's cool. Can you share a little more about that?
Yeah, well, it's an area of research right now, but the rough concept is that if you have, like Ethereum right now has about 250 million accounts, and out of those, a much smaller fraction of those is active, like has been used in the past couple of months. So a simple idea is just to archive accounts that haven't been touched in a while, and move them from SSD, for example, to a hard disk. Which is, still like an order of magnitude cheaper than SSD.
I see.
And so then the problem is if someone queries or makes a reference to an account, you need to know whether that account is, like if you look it up in SSD and you don't see it, you need to know whether it either exists on the hard disk, like in the cold storage, or if it's a completely new account. And so things like Bloom filters could keep track of whether that thing exists on hard disk.
Got it. How would you prevent someone from spamming the network by intentionally looking up stuff that's in the disk?
Well, you would just price it appropriately. So it's a mechanism design problem or a fee market problem.
Got it. I see. Oh, that's pretty cool. Well, let's go back to the DeFi thing for a second, because one issue I see is a lot of DeFi protocols don't have a clear path to sustainability. Like they either live off of a big treasury or they become like Uniswap, where they start charging a fee inside of the UI, or if you use a cow swap inside of Gnosis Safe, they'll charge you a fee. I mean, you can bypass it by going directly to the website, but clearly, if these what the big players have converged on charging a fee, then I mean they got to make money. We understand that. But do you see there's any end game to sustainability and what is also trying to be a public good? How do you see that kind of a problem and how that could end?
Yeah, I don't have all the answers. I think a couple of assorted thoughts. First of all, in traditional finance, we frequently see that it's the entity that gets closest to the user that is able to capture the lion's share of value. So in the context of trading, this would be Robinhood. This would be eToro. This would be like whatever app the user is using on their phone to enter orders, which then ultimately either get routed to different exchanges or actually in the equities market, much more frequently, that flow gets sold to a wholesaler like Citadel or Virtue. And so basically when people are trading, instead of their orders getting sent directly to public exchanges, Citadel is paying Robinhood to route orders to their dark pool. And if the dark pool can fill the order, then it does. And if not, then it gets routed to the public market. And Robinhood gets a huge amount of its revenue actually from this order flow selling business. So I think that for any app builder, it is important to keep in mind that being the front end, like being the interface to ultimately the ecosystem, is incredibly valuable. And I think it suggests that it's worth it for everyone to invest in building high quality UX, probably mobile first, because realistically all of us use our phones so much, and that share just grows every year. But yeah, I think that it is actually kind of bullish for apps, because at the end of the day, the app is the entity that's capable of getting very close to the end user, as opposed to the layer 1 or layer 2, for example, which is just unopinionated infrastructure sitting at the back end that is not directly interacting with the user.
Got it. Oh, that's a good insight. Thanks. Yeah, for any of you guys who are building apps.
Yeah, and sorry, the other thing I wanted to mention really briefly is that I think the brand, it's very clear that the brand is incredibly important. It's an obvious statement, but for the reason why people choose to use Gnosis Safe over a fork is really just trust. They trust the Gnosis Safe team. They trust that the overall OPSEC of deployments and the OPSEC around the front end. All of this is very, very professional. So I think that trust is a big part of any brand, and more generally, like once someone deposits in a Gnosis Safe, then they kind of have them. Like as you were saying, they have the ability to then charge for swapping in Uniswap through Gnosis Safe. And yeah, I just think that the great brands, the great crypto projects of the future are the ones that have built really, really strong brands. And you see this time and time again. Like Jupiter on Solana has a really great brand. Pump.fun has a very strong, I mean, it's a mixed, obviously, brand, but it's like if you were going to launch a meme coin, there's so many Pump.fun clones that have popped up, and they offer kind of the same value, but at the end of the day, who captures the lion's share of the value is Pump.fun, because everyone knows, like, okay, well, if I want to launch my meme coin, why would I not launch it at Pump.fun? And if someone is going to buy a meme coin, like, that's where they're going to go. So just stating the obvious, but I think, all of us should just spend time building the brand and thinking about what their brand symbolizes. Got it.
Well, that might not be obvious to some people. Someone actually did disagree. I just said, like, DeFi has no moats. You can just fork. And I said, no, I think brand has a moat. And they replied, nah, I think maybe it's a moat, but it's not that big deal. So I guess we'll see. But I definitely fall on the side that brand is a very powerful moat. But let's talk about moats in general in Web3. Is it even possible to have a technology moat nowadays, or do you need to have a brand moat or a community moat, or what are the moats that exist in our industry?
Right. I think that, well, first of all, technology is a big input into the brand. Like if you think about Uniswap versus SushiSwap, it's like Uniswap. This Uniswap team originally built the code, and then SushiSwap forked it. And so, you might be worried as any protocol builder that someone's just going to come along and fork the thing that you built. And we think about this as well a lot, or not a lot, but like we do think about it within our team also. But at the end of the day, I do really think that in crypto, there's a huge value that it accumulates to one's brand by building something new. And although
that's definitely been my experience.
Yeah, although people can come along and fork things, at the end of the day, the brand is the thing that really matters. That's because it's not just about the code right now. It's also all of the development that is going to be done in the future. And, it's like a proof of work thing. Like the team that built the thing that you use is going to be the one that's going to continue to improve the thing and make more things that you want to use. And so that clearly that, all the brand value accumulates to the original creator. So that's the first way in which I would say that technology is a moat. It's a moat through that input into brand, which is definitely a moat. But then I think the other thing is that, almost every app is a marketplace of some sort. And a marketplace is matching buyers and sellers. If Pump.fun, where meme create supply, and then meme coin buyers come with their demand, and they're met there. Or like Aave is clearly a market. Most things that we think of, they're basically markets, and markets have network effect power. Like the network effect is that you want to borrow USDC and you want to borrow a lot of it. You go wherever the cheapest rate is, and the cheapest rate is probably wherever there's the most USDC already available and there's the most trust, like where depositors demand the lowest yield in order to deposit, and that's probably Aave, and Aave built that. So I think that it's like all these things are kind of tied together, but it's very true that because many of us are building markets, and markets really have a significant network effect.
Got it. Let's see here. Well, speaking of Uniswap, one thing that caught my attention recently is they gave a $600,000 grant to Atrium Academy to run the Uniswap Hooks incubator, and by their own numbers, 91 developers ended up creating a hook. Now, I don't. Let's optimistically say half of those could turn into serious projects, but let's be very optimistic and say all 91 end up becoming serious projects, which means they paid slightly under $7,000 per engineer to onboard them to the ecosystem. What do you think that's a good number for acquisition costs, or bad? Like, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think it depends on how you think about it. Like every question, the answer is it depends. But I think that if
it was $1 million, it probably doesn't depend, right? Maybe if you onboarded Pump.fun for $1 million, then maybe it's worth it.
For sure.
Let's just say on average.
For sure. Yeah. I think a couple of things. One is that if it's really 91 or even 45 new integrations on top of Uniswap, then that probably is worth it, because to have, like, Uniswap is trying to build an ecosystem of projects that are composing on top of it. That drives more flow to Uniswap. Ultimately, it cements its network effect. Maybe it helps to defend against any competitors. Like, there's a lot of reasons why that $7,000 or $14,000 per integration might be worth it. I think another thing is that with some of these grant programs, it's not just the only value, or it's not just the case that the only value comes from the exact number of deployments on top of the protocol, but it's also the marketing value of having this big grant program. It's the creating, like, ladders for people to, maybe ladders is the wrong word, but like creating pathways for people who are interested to be able to fund themselves to learn. It's like a broader investment in the ecosystem and a broader investment in the broader ecosystem as well. Like, I think there are merits to that as well. It really depends. I mean, there are some very well-resourced treasuries out there, and I feel like, that value kind of like got created from nothing originally. So it is actually a value to spread some of that to the rest of the ecosystem, even if from an explicit, dollars per developer metric, it might not seem like it's worth it. Because you could also imagine that they could spend that, or maybe not $600,000, but like $100,000 just, they could be doing other things that also have that goal of just like donating back to the ecosystem that have zero like hooks that are created as a result of that. So I think it's not, you would have to cut it up. Like, maybe you would say out of that $600,000 budget, maybe like $300,000 was just pure, like, trying to seed the ecosystem more. And then the other 300 is like getting those 45 hooks. And then the number becomes very different in terms of the cost per hook.
I see. Got it. Well, let's talk more about engineer and auditor acquisition into an ecosystem, because it's fairly competitive right now. A lot of some people joke that there's more L2s than there are, engineers, or even blockchains in general. So in each of those, I don't think that's true, but
it might be true, actually. So Conduit and Caldera, like, you just click a button and you got a new
Can
L2.
someone create a bash script that will spin up a bunch of L2s so that will just be true for now, and then just shut them down afterwards? So, not just L2s. It's like, protocols, data availability layers, L1s, pretty much everything. So what do you think is, how do you approach, like, hey, we want to onboard, especially because you guys you only have a DevNet right now, right? How do you think about onboarding builders and breakers? See what I did there? Onboarding these people who are really going to generate a lot of value on the ecosystem.
Yeah, I think it's...
And sorry, and one more thing. How do you think about doing that economically? Because some people spend huge amounts of money on it. Like, they're consistently running these $100,000 hackathons and whatnot.
Right. I think that, yeah, it's two things. One is trying to do a lot of things that don't cost anything, like trying to do as many of those things as possible, like just having good online resources. Like, that doesn't really cost any. There's no explicit cost associated with, I guess, our team's time to like build that, but that's clearly worth it. Like, just having really good accessible resources, so that people aren't jumping through hoops just to understand how to get access, or how to build things, how to debug. I think, just to clarify, it costs a lot to make the content, but the marginal cost of distribution is almost zero. Absolutely, yeah. So that's I think we should, our team is pretty focused on that. I think we also have a lot of resources, so we're not opposed to doing things that bring people together, like create IRL experiences where folks can meet other builders and be in a productive environment and learn and just have, lock in. There's nothing wrong with that either. I agree that there's a lot of, you said there's a lot of competition in terms of the like hackathon space and the event space. I don't disagree. I think that there's in this space generally like too many similar-ish events. I think this is a great counterexample where I think this is a very unique event that's very targeted and I think very high value. So I do see, I know that there's a stat with DevCon that there's 800 side events, or like more side events than any other conference before. And our team was looking at that, and we were actually thinking that part of that might be because people are moving to smaller events, which is good because I think people are starting to realize like, oh, it's actually not that effective to have, a giant, day of panels with like 1,500 attendees and rent out a hall and then have like 100 people or 50 people show up. I think that there's more awareness of that now, and I do see a decent number of high quality events. So I'm pretty confident that over time our space will learn from that and just continue to evolve. But the other thing to point out is that there really should be more of a focus on onboarding new folks into the Web3 space, learning from how accelerators or hackathons are run in the Web2 space, where generally they're on much smaller budgets and much more focused on ROI than this environment where there's a lot of cash-rich foundations that are not necessarily haven't had the time to be thoughtful.
Yeah. Speaking of onboarding new people, one thing that is difficult, a lot of the perception is, oh, this is all just a bunch of degen gambling sort of a thing, and I'm a developer, I just want a normal job. Or if I take attention to it, it's only because I might get paid highly in a bull market or something like that. I've thought about, is there a way that we can brand to people outside of the ecosystem that attracts serious builders? I mean, one thing I was thinking about last night is, okay, so for developers who are bored of making the 12th full stack app on MERN or whatever, maybe, hey, what you're going to work on has a good chance of not seeing production. We do a lot of experimental things, but maybe that's what you should be excited about is you don't have a PhD, but you still get to do some researchy sort of things. Do you think there's any way that we can, what are your thoughts about making things exciting for people outside of the ecosystem besides number go up?
Yeah.
Specifically like engineers and security people.
Yeah, we were talking about this a lot as well within our team, because I think that honestly a lot of normal people just need to realize that although it's a little bit risky to like work in Web3, it's not actually really that risky. And in fact, the risk reward from the perspective of getting to move quickly and learn a lot of new skills and just upskill very quickly is actually incredible. So I think that, and we were talking about this also from the context not only of developers, but also non-developers, like people that we've had a lot of community members who are not developers who have just told their friends about, gotten them involved in the Monad community. And then over time, some of these people are, quitting their jobs and going full time into Web3. And a lot of it is actually just educating people about the fact that it's really not that risky at all. And it can be very rewarding. You learn a lot. You have a lot of opportunities for career advancement compared to working in a traditional company, big company where I personally feel it would be a lot less fun. So as long as people are more aware of just like that there's very limited downside, if at all, and it's actually a lot more fun and you'll do a lot and be challenged a lot. I think that, as we get that message out more, then we'll have more and more folks coming into the space.
Got it. Really cool. Okay, I think I'll have like two more and then we'll wrap it up here. Let's talk about founders being active on Twitter. So a lot of people are, there's some opinions that you must, you're not doing your job if you're not, really chronically online and engaging with people. But on the other hand, I've seen some companies do perfectly fine where some people don't know I exist, and that makes me so happy. So what are your thoughts around that? I mean, should only founders who have a natural talent for it do it, or is it just money you're leaving on the table if you don't do it? How do you think about? I'm talking to you as a founder, but I guess if you could also generalize it for like how other team members are helping with that. Maybe you hire someone to do it, or what do you think?
Totally. I think first of all, there's no way to avoid doing the thing. So the most important thing is to build the thing that you've set out to build, and that is literally the most important thing that matters. So I think it's important to get that out of the way first, because when you talk about like founders that are very active on Twitter, if that's at the expense of building the thing, then that's really bad. Like, you don't want that. And that's not a setup for long-term success. I do think that if you are building the thing and you do have you and the rest of the team are doing a good job of executing to build the thing, then any spare cycles are definitely beneficial to be spent communicating about what you're building, why it's important, communicating the vision. I think people don't want to follow brands. They don't want to follow products. They want to follow people. And so fundamentally, if you can figure out what it is you can share with other people that educates them or inspires them or entertains them, then that's really worthwhile. I think those are all obvious points. But yeah, I guess I would just say that, everyone has some downtime in their day. Like everyone has, time when they're like on the subway or in a taxi or, hate to say it, but like on the toilet, like, you have time to like share your thoughts and communicate with your community.
Got it. Well, what would you suggest to someone who has, like, let's say, less than 25 followers, and someone who has, let's say, 1,000 to 2,000 followers, and someone who's north of 5,000? What would you suggest to people like that? Yeah,
I actually like when people don't have a lot of followers, because there's just so many accounts on Twitter that are botted, where 95% of their followers are bots, and to me that just says like that they're optimizing for the wrong thing. I think it actually hurts in terms of engagement as well, because then you have a bunch of followers that aren't actually doing anything, and the algorithm penalizes that. But also, it's just like, if you have 25 followers, that's great. That means there are 25 people, or maybe not. Maybe some of those might also be like spam bots that just followed you randomly. That's okay too. I mean, I think there's a lot of legitimacy in having a very small follower account, and then just sharing what you want to share with the world and chipping away at it. I think that more important than number of followers actually is consistency. Like doing anything consistently will compound over time. You just don't know how long it's going to take to get to some other milestone. But if you build the habit of posting regularly and sharing what you're building, or just sharing anything really that gets people to engage. And I think also a lot of in the early days, a lot of it is kind of A/B testing. So you're trying things, seeing what people respond to, and then if you're if you are a machine learning algorithm that can learn from that and lean into the things that people are responding to, then you'll learn over time and get better. And then that ultimately builds up a great capability when you do have more followers.
Nice. Let's see here. We'll wrap up on this question. So, personal question: as an education company, where do you see the gaps in the education in the market? Obviously, in the context of engineering and whatnot.
Right. Yeah, I think that curation is still not really there. I mean, I think that your bootcamp and some of the resources that I was looking at a page on Rare Skills the other day, which was 150 interview questions. That's great. It's common sense. That page should exist, but I don't think I've seen that from anywhere else before. Yeah, I think that it starts with curation, because there's a lot of resources out there, but it's just random people blogging stuff, explaining what is a Merkle tree, or how does the Ethereum consensus work, or how does ERC20 work, or things like that. But a lot of it is low quality. So I think that just having better curation is literally the single biggest obstacle to knowing how to learn efficiently.
So do you mean curation here's a list of articles you can read in a certain order, or do you mean other people sharing those lists? What would that look like?
Yeah, I think that I feel like if I were developer trying to learn Solidity, I would just type into Google what best Solidity course, and then I don't know what I would find, but I feel like it's not necessarily the best outcome. I mean, this is true in many industries as well. The SEO makes everything adversarial, but I feel in the developer Twitter space, I also don't. I'm not sure that there's great knowledge of what the absolute best resources are out there.
Cool. Go for it.
I just want to know because I think a lot about it, but I want to know what and how is Monad differentiating developer acquisition as compared to other EVM compatible. Were you able to hear my question, or
Yeah.
So just repeating for everyone else, I want to know how like Monad is differentiating developer acquisition strategies as compared to like other EVM L1s or like L2s, because everyone seems to just gather around the same place, which is ETH Global, which I feel is inefficient. I'm ready to debate about it outside after the panel, but like, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think that the existing means of participating are not bad per se, but I feel like that can't be the only thing that it's done. Like, I think it's totally fine to participate in ETH Global and contribute resources. Like, it's quite expensive for them to put on these events. So I know the sponsorships are expensive, but it's for a reason. But I think also just doing creative individual initiatives. So like for our team, we have a co-working space in our office in NYC that is a space for developers to just utilize the space, have a nice environment to work in, where we have periodic workshops. And that's one specific thing that was more creative that we came up with as a means of providing resources to developers. I think at the end of the day, a lot of it is just about creating things that we think would be useful and then testing them and getting feedback, seeing if they are actually used, if they are actually useful, and then continuing to double down on the areas that are valuable.
How big of a role does like IRN engagements play according to you for like developer acquisition as compared to like the retail and the consumers?
I think that it's one of the pieces. Certainly having online scalable resources is just better in terms of scaling, but I think that there is a huge value to people being able to meet other people that are very technical and build their network. Those connections end up going a long way.
So Monad has played very well in the attention economy, like for like in the sense of like getting or garnering a community, but that does not always convert to like getting like developers around you. Being built around the EVM and like being EVM compatible definitely helps because of all the resources that exist already. But what do you think like Monad is doing different to have more developer eyeballs and retain?
Right, like you said with the community, I think the community is one piece of the puzzle or one thing that attracts developers to Monad, because they know that because there's such a passionate community, that community is going to be there to support them in their individual initiatives. I think that you can't really understate the value of even like 1 or 5 really passionate community members that are just there cheering on your project. Because it's such a big part of Web3 and the momentum that I think helps in the early days to just have that moral support of a couple of seemingly random people on the internet. So I think that is part of it. I wouldn't fully discount it with respect to developer acquisition, although it is they are separate considerations, but it's one piece. And then beyond that, it is being a performance substrate that means that your application can scale to many users without impeding the user acquisition process. Like fees are basically antiviral, and you're trying to go viral. Fees are antiviral, so we want the lowest possible fees. And then, just like having a good curated set of resources for learning how to upskill at whatever level you are in Solidity development or Viper development or other languages. And then a supportive network of events that are IRL or online. For example, Monad Madness is a pitch competition that we held the first iteration of in New York about a month ago that put 20 teams on stage in front of a panel of VC judges and over 1,000 people tuning in over the live stream. These are just ways to help support the developer community so that they can get individual developers can get more attention on their project and more resources and ultimately get these things that are the lifeblood for them.
All right. I think we're going to wrap it up here. You guys can catch them. The Monad team is around. You can see them wearing their shirts if you want to be in touch.
Yep.
We have a gift for you. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you so much.
So this is some Sri Lankan tea. So we have an office there, so they wanted to give it to you.
Amazing.
It's very good. I drink it all the time, by the way. So, all right. If you have any closing words or anything, and then we'll wrap it up here.
Thank you so much for listening, and our team is here in this row right here. These three folks. And Eunice behind them. So please, come find us if you have any other questions about building a monad. Thank you.